Hey everyone, Robert here, author of Expansion Mastery, the practical guide to living a fully engaged life. Are you ready to start living life to the fullest? Are you ready and willing to transform yourself and your life from ordinary to extraordinary? Well then let's get to it, my friends. Welcome to the Fully Engaged Life. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Before I get started with today's episode, I would like to tell you, fret not, the Breathing Mastery program is coming. There's been an incredible amount of obstacles in the way recently between them doing repairs and painting, and then, of course, the tragic Kincaid fire and all of the scheduled power outings. So my wife and I were living several days off of a solar generator. So needless to say, I wasn't sure if I would even be able to be getting this particular podcast out in time. So it seems that things are starting to stabilize, and the heroic firefighters and first responders in Sonoma County are getting that blaze under control, thankfully. So things are starting to go back to normal a little bit, and I'm going to have the first module of the Breathing Mastery program up very soon for you, and the additional modules will be following closely behind. So I encourage you to stay with me and make sure that you get this program. It's going to give you such an incredibly solid foundation for your spiritual practices, for your health and well-being, everything. It's just essential. Okay, so on to today's episode. We are continuing in the Earth section of my book, Expansion Mastery, and we have completed the exoteric practices, and we are now on the second of the esoteric challenges in that section. So this is the 6th Earth practice, the 15th overall practice for you to enjoy. This one is called the 5 elements. Now, the idea of the 5 elements is allowing us to get to the very building blocks of matter and all that we know in the universe. And there are several models of this, such as the model used primarily by the Japanese as well as Tibetans, that utilizes the 5 elements of earth, water, fire, wind, and void. In the West, we have the old model of earth, water, fire, and wind. And then, of course, in China, we have a different element set, which is earth, water, fire, wind, and metal. And this one from China is referring more to how all of these elements interact with one another in various stages. There are 4 different models of that. So today we're going to be looking at the model of earth, water, fire, wind, and void. And the reason for that is because this model is used in the formal authentic teachings of mindfulness. So we're going to take a look at this particular model and grasp what this practice is all about. So in the beginning, we want to understand that the earth represents the solid parts of ourselves. If we look at the human body as a model for this, the bones, the muscles, the organs, things like that. All around us, we can see what the earth is, right? The dirt, the trees, anything that's really solid, the rock, all of that would be considered to be earth. And then, of course, we have water. This is our blood, saliva, urine, all the various body fluids that a human being has out in nature. It's quite obvious, right? Rivers, lakes, oceans, things like that, rain. Then we have fire, and this is kind of dealing with the metabolism, the electrical currents in our body We could say it's the chi, as far as a vital energy force. We understand that our body has an electromagnetic field. So all of that is part of this fire element. Once again, if we look at nature, then fire is represented primarily by the sun and even lightning. So if we looked at the wind is referring to cellular respiration. It's our breath. In nature, we can see this as the wind, oxygen, the air all around us. And then the void. For the human being, the void can refer to consciousness. It can also refer to your mind. It depends on the model. And we can see this in nature as possibly the source or the universal consciousness that exists. So in the practice, and I'm going to add another practice that is not in my book, so you get some new material to interact with this. If we look at these elements, what we want to do is start to understand that we are made of these elements. Every person is made up of the same elements, and everything in the known universe is made up of these elements. So it's our ability to take a look and understand ourselves at a very base state. Here we're getting into, an atomic type of model where we are looking at the building blocks of matter, and that includes ourselves and everything in the physical world around us. And the point of this is to understand that our physical body, the physical body, it is not truly us, who we are, comes from the unification of all of these elements. And when we die, our body will decompose and once again return to this base elemental state. Now, in the formal practices of mindfulness, one of the things that they do is incorporate this type of practice and understanding as a way to start to dissolve the ego, to dissolve the identity of the physical form, so that you realize that you are not your physical body, and therefore you don't identify so closely with it, and that helps dissolve that bit that the ego has created and which the ego clings to. Right? So if we look at many religions, especially here in the West, we see that a lot of times they like to include your physical form in some manifestation, whether it's a ghost or whatever it is. For instance, when you die and you go to heaven, you're still you in your physical form or physical manifestation in some way. Of course, this is really not the case. That is not how these things work. And this sort of teaching and realization of the five elements helps us understand that fact. So first we start to recognize this all around us. You can look out your window and see all of the trees and the hills and all of the solid manifestations of nature and realize, that would all be associated as earth in this particular model. We can see when we're working out and we're making our muscles bigger and stronger, we can see as we work with our tendons and the alignments of our bones that all of those things are also part of the earth. They're made of the same thing. And then, of course, we can see the rain and the lakes and streams and ponds and even mud puddles, all of these different expressions of water. And within ourselves, we get to see this every time we swallow our saliva, every time a tear runs down our face, every time we go to the bathroom to relieve ourselves, to urinate, and of course, when we're doing particular exercises, the synovial fluid in our joints There's so many fluids that we have in our body, right? So this is all associated with the water. So we want to get to understand that. We want to look at the sunshine and the lightning and understand that they're forms of fire, that kind of intensity and power, and how we need things like the sunshine, right? So we want to be able to see this model of earth, water, fire, wind, and void in ourselves. We want to be able to see it in everything all around us. And what this does is starts to initiate the understanding that we are all connected. We are all one. We are one with everyone and everything in regards to the fact that we are all made of the exact same stuff. It may look different, it may be more or less of this one or that one depending on the individual, but we still all contain those same base elements. And then as we engage these types of practices and understanding, we understand that in reality, any of these elements that form matter are simply forms of energy, because matter as such doesn't truly exist. It's just a denser form of energy and vibration, right? So we start to take a look at that and realize, geez, this is all the human body is, and that is not me. It's wonderful that I have it. We're not trying to discourage our appreciation for the vehicle in which we get to experience life. Just the opposite. We're trying to create a greater appreciation for it by understanding what it truly is. But we're looking at going deeper and deeper within ourselves through these elements. So we're trying to dissolve the physical. We're trying to take away the physical. We're trying to take away the mental. We're trying to get to the heart of what is left when we don't have that anymore, because it is through this that we have the discovery of who and what we truly are. So in some of the formal, authentic practices, this particular practice is not one of the most positive or fun to engage. It's actually a little dark, but it's necessary. And then once you understand it and you go through, you realize it's really not dark at all. It's natural. It's perfectly natural. So I'll give you an idea of what this is. So the idea is we lie down on the floor and we just pay attention. We put our mental attention onto our physical body. We feel everything, our eyelids, our lips, everything. We just take careful note of the entire physical body. And then we usually have someone guide us through it, because this can get a little emotional the first or second time you go through it. But as you're lying there, they start to take you through your death. Okay, so they say, okay, you have died. And then what they do is they start to pick that apart. So they begin by having you look down on your corpse and see that your body, has died, that there is no more fire. The spark of life has left that physical form and has returned to wherever it came from, the great chi field, the source, whatever you want to call it, right? And that with your dying breath, the last bit of wind exits the body and the breath goes back into the air, no longer in you. Of course, when you die, then you release fluids, and over time, all of the fluids cease, and you look at these things just kind of exiting the body as the body starts to decompose, and all of the fluids sink into the earth and return back to the water table, and then the earth is your physical form, and all of your flesh and bones returns to dust, right? This is why there's so many songs like dust in the wind, right? And then we hear at funerals, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. So this is referring to the physical body returning to a base state. And you see your body just kind of dissolve away. The actual practice is far more graphic, so I'm not going to go into all of that. And there's a very particular way that the version I was taken through is more Tibetan influenced. And so it's dealing with certain practices that are common in Tibet, that if you don't know that, you wouldn't understand exactly what was going on. So this is just the abridged version of that. But this is the idea. So all of that goes away, and your mind is gone. The fire, the spark of life is gone. The breath is gone. The fluids are gone, and the physical body is gone. All of the muscles and bones. And what is left? What is left? And through this process of seeing your corpse and seeing yourself kind of decay away into nothingness, this process helps to dissolve the ego, because the ego is all about creating identity, right? So how it clings to your physical identity starts to fall away, starts to dissolve away. And commonly when you go through this practice, when you're done, you don't even realize it, but tears are just streaming down your face, and you're crying, but you're not, nothing else on your face is crying, right? It's just these tears are just pouring out of your eyes at your own demise. And that's part of the sign that you are overcoming the ego if you're crying. I've taken people through this and they never shed a tear, and that's because they're actually resisting the practice and they're clinging tightly to that physical identity. And they usually say things like, well, then why do I care about my body at all? If this is a case, that makes no sense. That's the ego. It's a defense mechanism of the ego. And those people are stuck at that point. But for those who can allow this process to unfold, we understand the elements on a much more deep level. And we are able to begin overcoming the ego at the same time. It's very phenomenal practice. Like I said, it's a little dark at first. It's hard, but it's a very necessary part of the training in order to understand truly the lesson that the elements are trying to give us here, and to attain a sense of mindfulness and awakening by letting go of the ego's identifying with our physical form, and realize that once that physical form is gone, we, in our actual formlessness, still exist. And through this, we start to get a glimpse as to the fact that this is not an atheist practice to where, okay, the body dissolves and goes back into the ground and there's nothing left, right? The wind of the surroundings, the environment comes through and blows the dust that you used to be away and you're gone. It's not an atheist point of view, because there's something that still exists. And you discover it by allowing the elements to dissolve, allowing the physical body to dissolve away. And we also see that it's not a Western religious model where when the body dies, the spirit, right, that still has this ghostly type of shape of your human body, your identity, that doesn't exist that way. And what is left is energy. That energy never dies. That is what exists. The mind and body dissolve away. So this is why the 5 elements are important to our spirituality. What we are trying to do is to understand everything in the physical world, everything in the known universe in its base state of these elements, and how these elements come together in different forms and work together in an incredibly complex way. And if you want to understand how that happens within ourselves, then you can understand the Chinese model. If you want to understand how that happens in nature, you can look at either the Chinese model or the Japanese Tibetan model. One is not better, one is not lesser than the other. They're just two different perspectives. And it's very interesting to understand them both. That's why I mentioned both of them in my book, because it gives us a more complete view. We have to remember that it's the ego that prefers this or that. When we look at these things without the ego, we understand that they both have value, that they're just different perspectives, and that if we want to gain a true understanding, we should grasp all of the perspectives available. So in my book, I gave you a little bit easier, more positive way to start to interact with these elements. So I would refer you to that particular practice. And as such, in this, you make headings for the Chinese version of the elements, which is earth, water, fire, wood, and metal. You could also do this with the other version we just spoke about, which is earth, water, fire, wind, and void. So you can do either. And then start to take a look at all of those things that make up the earth. Take a look at all of those ways that the earth element is expressed. And then understand how these elements allow us to see the relationship between ourselves and the world around us. Like I said, the Chinese model is very good for that. That's why I used that particular model in my book. So I hope that clears that up. And then you can look at how all of these things interact with one another. You get to see how everything in the known universe is in a constant state of coming into being and decaying and interacting with the other elements. So the last part of that is using the elements to understand them in their alchemical state. For example, how water becomes slush, slush becomes ice, things like that. So you understand each transformation that an element can go through. And I think that's very fun. Of course, when we go in the other direction, it can become steam and vapor, right? So it's very interesting to get to know the elements this deeply and this personally. And then, of course, after that formal practice, I put some tables up regarding the Japanese and Tibetan model of earth, water, fire, wind, and void, giving you some ways to interact with that. So the purpose of using that, making those different in the book, is to give you two different perspectives to work with, because it gives you more of the totality. One system may claim that they have all the answers and they have an incredible amount of information and understanding at their fingertips through that model that they use, but they don't have it all. So if we look at these things through different perspectives, we get a much broader perspective, and through that we can see the bigger picture of reality and truth. I literally spent decades working with the five elements because it's fascinating. It's a fascinating subject, and it's fun to work with. It's very interesting to work with it in so many ways. And that's included in our martial arts. It's included in the spirituality. It's included in everything. You can't escape it in this physical world, right? So then we learn how to interact with them, to understanding them much more intimately. And then that leads us to helping begin to dissolve the ego and no longer identify with our physical self that way. We start to understand who and what we truly are. So this is a fantastic practice, and I hope you have a great time with it. It's a lot of fun, and there's so many ways you can work with this. I mean, you can even get into the area of feng shui with this, because you can start to understand the flow of energy within these different elements and how they work together. I mean, it's just endless. There's so much you can do, and I simply have always been drawn to and been a fan of these type of elements and their practices. Even in the Chinese martial art of Xingyi Quan, right, we get to see that they have the 5-element fist. I know they also have an animal version, which I really don't feel drawn to, so I work on mastering the elements. And of course, it's a Chinese martial art, so they use the Taoist model of earth, water, fire, wood, and metal. So enjoy that. Have a blast. Work with that. Realize that that is what formed our physical body, and our body is going to go back into those states from which it came. And that helps us not to cling to our physical form so much, not to cling to that aspect of our identity that has been formed by the mind. Please make sure and visit me at www.expansionmastery.com. Keep checking back. Trust me, the Breathing Mastery program will be available there. I promise. It's just have to overcome these obstacles. I got to go with the flow, right? So I have to work on these things when I can, and when I can't, I work on other things. So it'll be there. Make sure that you grab your autographed copy of Expansion Mastery. Make sure you grab your copy of the ebook, Reinventing Yourself Through Realignment. Make sure that you get those things. They will help you out greatly. And, of course, help me out by making sure that you subscribe to the YouTube channel and you share these podcasts, you make comments, hit the like button, you do all that social media stuff. All of that helps to create a presence and share real, authentic spiritual practices with the world. Until next time, my friends, I wish you the very best in your practices and your life. Take care.